I'm Louise Kennedy, the founder of Oculus HR. Welcome to Mind the Generation Gap. I've spent my career helping people work better together. And right now is such an interesting time to be in business. We're seeing a real shift in the workplace as different generations start to bring new ideas and also opportunities. In this series, I want to look past the headlines and also explore how that we can bridge the generation gap. I'll be talking to business owners, educators and the next generation to hear their stories and really find out how we can work together to future-proof our businesses. We're here today with Laura Middleton. She is going to be having a discussion with me and talking about Gen Z and the challenges that come across in the workplace. What we've certainly found over the course of all these interviews that we've been doing for the podcast is that there's so much positivity that's around, but actually what we really want to discuss are the challenges that come through from there as well. Laura's been working with me in the business for probably about the last year or so we know the difficulties that come along and the conversations, so she's close enough to the business to really to be able to push and challenge. So hopefully this is a conversation that people want to hear but nobody else wants to have. So for us it'll be about being able to have those conversations that highlight what the difficulties are within workplaces and just be able to structure that a little bit more. So hopefully you enjoy the episode. But we've got Laura here who's going to be able to, who actually is a business owner, has owned businesses, is an investor, has done plenty of her own things as well. So
and employed a lot of Gen Z over the years as well. And I think what's been really interesting is we always have these conversations off camera where we go, right, okay, we're really going to get into the challenges in this podcast episode. And then naturally and rightly so, people are really positive about the things that businesses can do and employers can do for Gen Z. But actually the conversations that we often have off camera are very, very different, aren't they?
And I think that's very much the conversation that we want to have today. Just to be able to highlight, the struggles that actually some businesses are really experiencing. And certainly that's what we're picking up, from a business point of view. My team's going out and having those difficult conversations in businesses, whether it's with the employer, with the employee, with the parent of the employee, which we'll move on to. But they are some of the big challenges that we're coming across.
Absolutely.
So hopefully we can highlight these a little bit more, and people enjoy listening because it'll resonate with the experiences that they are going through as well.
So how about I set the scene then, because you work with, I'm going to say thousands of businesses. I mean, you work definitely hundreds.
Hundreds of businesses.
Hundreds of businesses. I like a little bit of exaggeration in there. But you've worked with hundreds of businesses over the years. Has Gen Z entering the workplace actually had an impact?
I think it definitely has. I think what we're seeing are more concerns that are coming through from businesses not really knowing how to deal with or manage people in an effective way to what they would have done before. So I think the conversation is a little bit different. And to be truthful, I think it puts some businesses off employing people that are younger because there are certain words that are being used to describe them, like word like entitled or, the expectations there. And businesses are used to working in the way that they work and really don't want to move to something else. But actually they're receiving this whole new generation of people coming through, needing to think about how they're future-proof and kind of prepare for the next step. But actually there's this big gap around that employability part.
So why do you think there's a gap now when there never used to be such a significant gap? So when we entered the workplace, for example, you turned up and you were told what you needed to do. You weren't really able to challenge anything. There was just a real expectation on you to hit the ground running and just get on with it and do what you were told. What's different?
I think, if we backtrack a little bit, I bet there was some generational differences between, who we are and kind of that generation before us. I bet there was some generational differences.
Of course.
We forget,
Rose-tinted glasses, we were perfect.
But I think maybe that gap now is even bigger. And, I think the challenges that are coming back, so things that were just touched on briefly there was that parental control, thinking about technology, thinking about kind of the hybrid work and, people's expectations are different to what they would have been before. They don't want to necessarily work any more than 9 to 5 if that's their core hours of work, where we would have maybe gone above and beyond. And certainly as part of these interviews that we've done with people, they would have, been trained as maybe as an accountant and worked, put the pressure on themselves to work 12, 14 hours a day. And yesterday, first day back off holiday for me, I did 13-hour day. Actually, as you do. So you go into that mode quite quickly. And I think what we're seeing is that there's a change of generation around what's important to them. So I think, from the conversations that we've had, I think people don't want to miss out on birthdays, you know, successes. They want to go to the gym. They don't necessarily want to go out and have after work drinks. Like, I remember living in Leeds, you know, I was a regular that I would go out and have drinks after work.
Which is what you did.
Which is what you did, you know, 20 years ago. But actually the same generation are coming through to say, well, actually, I'm going to go to the gym, or I'm going to go to Pilates, I'm going to go and do, you know, some exercise. And very often I think that is with friends. You know, I don't think, I mean, some people do it individually, but I think people are creating a new community in their lives where alcohol isn't the fundamental part of it, but I think there's a well-being part of that's really coming. So you're getting a mix of people that are coming through. And I think it's, you know, that's where it comes down to the expectation of the employer and the employee.
Of course.
But we're not saying one's right and one's wrong. We just need to say that there's an element of adjustment between the two.
So when I first started recruiting people, I'm talking back in 2015, I created my working hours to suit me. So mum, 3 kids at home, I needed to work school hours. So our office hours were 9:30 till 2:30, and the rest of the time you could work flexibly. So everybody was employed full time. And the younger members of staff would still be really flexible with their hours. And they said to me, because this was brand new, people weren't doing this at the time.
Yeah.
But because it suited me, it's why I did it. But they told me that the thing that they loved the most was that they were able to go to the gym. They were able to go and visit their nana. Mm-hmm. They were able to do the things. They were able to go to the doctors. Yeah. Because actually a 9 to 5 didn't allow them to actually get a doctor's appointment.
Yeah.
So it was, they experienced a really different way of living. Now, for me, those flexible hours were purely because I needed to run around after the kids. So I didn't get to enjoy the benefits that came with it, really. I did it because it was a need. Yeah. They loved it. Yeah. It completely changed the way that they lived their lives. I suppose it was the first introduction to proper work-life balance. Yeah. Mm-hmm. But then there was a part of me as the employer that, and I'll be really, really honest, it used to annoy me. And they were brilliant. They were absolutely, you know, the staff, the team were amazing. But I used to think to myself, yeah, but actually you could probably just work a bit more, or you could just work a little bit harder, or right now I could really do with you all just staying in the office rather than leaving. But I'd created this environment for a particular reason. They really enjoyed it and they thrived on it. But as an employer, and probably with my elder millennial hat on and how I was brought up, I would find myself getting really frustrated about it. And I think I couldn't be honest about that. I couldn't.
Because you'd created it.
I'd created it. Yeah. And actually, I didn't have the right to then sit there and say, well, hold on a second, I've given you these flexible hours, but I don't want you to use them. Yeah. So it was I found it a real challenge, and I found that I had to just hide what I was actually thinking and feeling about it. And that's what I've recognised in a lot of the people that we've interviewed, that we've spoken to about this, that they don't want to be honest about how they really feel around this idea of work-life balance. And actually, I don't want to do that because it's not part of my job description, or there's a frustration there, but nobody's saying it.
But nobody says it. And I think that's what we're experiencing, which really, you know, coming across this Gen Z, why we were selected to do this in the first place, to look into it more and to research it more, was about the difficulties that the employers that we're dealing with are having on a day-to-day basis, and the impact that's making upon, you know, their team, their managers, the people who are managing these situations. Mm-hmm. It was so significant. I'll go through some different examples that I can share. But they're so significant that actually the employees are a little bit stuck with what to do next. Yeah. So, but obviously we'd something that we'd kind of communicated last night was about a Gen Z company, wasn't it?
Yes.
Kind of we shared something, and somebody created that Gen Z business, and that was who they were going to recruit. And just a couple of points that I'd noted down
brilliant,
there,
wasn't it?
It was really good, yeah. So within the office environment, they create a bed so they can work horizontal. I mean,
it blows my mind.
I was going to say, that just doesn't even come into a remit of thinking, well, that's a good idea.
Yeah, but at the same time, though, if I work from home, I will work from my bed.
Yeah.
Because I'm comfortable, and once I get in the zone, I get in the zone, and I just stay in that position. The idea of it in the workplace, I can't get on board with that. No,
because that's completely different. Another thing was a room where you could take a little nap if you needed to crash. So, I mean, you just roll over in the bed, can't you? Put the laptop down, roll over in the bed.
But I also find this bit really weird. What's the thing with napping? I don't, because actually I'm probably at an age now where maybe it's acceptable to nap, but
it's not.
But the idea of napping in my 20s during a work day, I can't get my head around why.
Why would you need to?
Why would you need to? And why is that okay to do it at work. But I can also completely recognise that doesn't mean that I'm right. It just means that I'm maybe just old.
But it's not about being old. It's just about that generational difference, really, isn't it?
And what's acceptable in the workplace.
But actually, how many companies would it, somebody of our age owns a business? How many companies are going to make a space for someone to be able to sit in the bed and work, or then just pop your laptop down and have a little nap?
No, I can't.
I can't.
But she actually said that she said it would make the corporate, what did she say? Basically, like the corporate bigwigs go absolutely crazy, a bit rage baity. Yeah. But these are all the things that they're doing in this business.
Yeah. Well, the other couple of things that I thought were quite interesting, healthy lunches in-house were made. So somebody would bring
by
the lunches.
CEO's mum.
Yeah, she was bringing lunches in, which I think is a nice idea, good idea.
Love that.
And then the other bit, which I kind of sit on the fence, was everybody would have a company credit card, and no approval needed to be spent on it.
No questions asked.
No questions asked.
Do you know what I'm going to say? I absolutely would never do that.
No, I don't think I could either.
I think that is, this is awful. It sounds really patronising. I think that's really naive.
But I think there's also a level of respect, isn't it? And I think when somebody works, like if I think about my team, I don't think they would spend on a credit card unless they'd had a conversation to say, I'm thinking about doing this, I'm thinking about doing that. I don't think they would spend on a credit card without just having that conversation about it. But I think if you introduce that at the very beginning and you haven't got your expectations and standards in place, then actually you open it up. So I would agree there's a level of naivety that comes in with what she's trying to create there as well.
And I had a member of staff once when I had an e-commerce business who was, I had a rule around you weren't allowed to, first of all, you weren't allowed to process orders for yourself, and you weren't allowed to do it during working time. Yeah. If you want to buy something from the shop, that's absolutely fine. Do it outside of working hours, ask somebody else to process the order for you. And she broke both of those rules. Yeah. And she couldn't understand why I was really unhappy about that. Yeah. And I'm saying because, well, first of all, they're the rules in the business. And that's it. They're there for a reason. But also, imagine if everybody was just willy-nilly processing orders whenever they wanted by themselves. Yeah. Yes, of course, you want to be able to trust everybody, but you don't know these people personally. No. You don't, chances are if they've been in the organisation for 3 months, but they've got a company credit card. Yeah. You don't know what's going on in their lives. You don't know what pressure they're under. You don't know whether suddenly they feel this need to really take advantage, and it's an easy opportunity. So I just think as a business, it's
difficult. I knew years and years ago somebody who worked in HR, and it was actually somebody I knew, and he'd completely taken advantage of a credit card. And then all comes to all, he'd actually paid for flights for him and his friends to go on holiday. He'd paid for the hotel room.
Oh my God.
He'd paid all. So he'd end up spending like £4,000 or £5,000 all on this company credit card.
It happens.
Yeah, it does. And they were then trying to get the money back. He'd left the business and they were trying to get the money back. But that does open it up. So for all, if you're going to do something like that you said there about having your company policy and procedure around it, if you're going to have something like that, you still need some type of
approval.
Well, just boundaries, don't you? Of what's acceptable. As in these are the things that you can spend on a company credit card. And, within a certain credit amount. So I think it's dead interesting that it is. That's there was just a little real thing that we looked at, wasn't it? And it just in that way that it kind of moves forward of what
it does,
what it'll open up to be.
But the boundaries bit is really interesting because that idea of no questions asked, here's a company credit card because I trust you. Yeah. Because that's the type of environment that we've created. But actually, one of the things that's come out of the conversations, in fact, quite regularly, is that actually people need boundaries and they need expectations. Yeah. And sometimes as businesses, and lots of people have said this, we don't clearly explain or communicate what our expectations are. Yeah. So when you create that environment where you go, well, actually sleep when you want, work from the bed when you want, spend on a company credit card when you want, that's actually really difficult for employees to understand. Yeah. Where is that line? Where
are the boundaries?
What are the expectations?
I think one of the things that's come out throughout this is around communication, around transparency. So as you're saying about putting those standards and expectations in, whether it be about company credit cards or whether it's about kind of turning up for work on time. If you're working in a call centre, doesn't matter what your age is, you need to be there for a start time so you can pick up the phone and call. And, if you work, and we do a lot with GP surgeries, people need to be there for the phone starting to ring at 8:30, or you've got prescription line opens at 9 o'clock. Or, people need to be there on time, and that's where problems start coming if you're not very, very clear about it. and putting your structure in place, isn't it?
Yeah.
But talking about it and giving feedback, so if something's not working well, having a conversation about feedback, and, people are direct when those conversations take place, but you need to have them, I think, as a business.
Yeah. So one of the things that you've already mentioned is this idea of remote working, flexible working. And I think that, as I said, back in 2015, when I had that in my business, it was really quite unheard of. COVID changed everything.
Yeah.
Everybody went to working from home. And then trying to get people back into the workplace has been really difficult.
People are still struggling now.
Yeah. And obviously you start to hear now that some businesses say, right, it's just going to be a blanket. Everybody has to come back in. But we know that for a lot of businesses and for a lot of people, it's a really good thing to have hybrid working, have the opportunity for remote working. But there is becoming a level of expectation that people are entitled to it. And actually that doesn't work for all businesses. And an example from when I was hiring was I offered a role to a lady who was from Bulgaria, and she was fantastic, really, really wanted her to take the job. And she said, just before I accept the role, because I would really like to do the job, would I be able to work from Bulgaria? And she'd never once said it all the way through the interview process. And I said, well, initially no, because I need you here. I need you with the team. I need you to understand how it all works. And I said, maybe after 6 months, once, I know that you're really comfortable and I'm really comfortable, then we could have that conversation around it. I'm not totally against it. And she didn't take the job.
Because of that.
Yeah, but yet she'd never asked that question throughout. I'd never suggested that she would be able to work from another country.
Yeah.
And I was really torn by it, because I felt as though maybe I should have said yes, but then I also knew it wouldn't work.
I was going to say, and you have to then think about what works from a business point of view.
Yeah.
From a business, not just a personal point, it's a business point of view, isn't it?
Yeah.
And we have some businesses that are just really anti-hybrid working. You
Right.
know, so there's not a necessity for everyone to be in the office. However, they won't recruit anybody that doesn't want to work in the office.
At all.
At all. And now I think that creates other issues,
Yeah.
doesn't it? Because actually you're really scaling down your marketplace.
Yeah.
Because 9 times out of 10 people do want that flexibility on it. And I think, some of the stats again, it's 9 times out of 10 that someone of a Gen Z wants to be hybrid working.
Oh, really?
Yeah, so the stats are
wow.
high on that. So if you're thinking, and a lot of what they're also talking about is kind of the cultural fit. So again, information that goes through that we found through doing the podcasts are that people will go and look for a job that fit, or look for a business that fits their culture, then look for a job within that business. So there's, that's
interesting?
Really interesting, because actually we would have looked for a job. I mean, over the moon that would have been offered something, wouldn't we?
For me, it was just, which one's going to pay me the most?
Yeah.
Am I going to have Saturday night off?
Yeah. But all of that was relevant, isn't it? Of kind of what it is that you perceive it's going to be.
Yeah.
That how it makes an impact upon other people.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think.
So what about businesses where they actually can't offer remote working? Because that's a real challenge. You mentioned a GP surgery.
Yeah.
If you're going to work on the reception desk at a GP surgery, you have to be there. You
have
can't
to be there, yeah.
You can't work from home. But it's almost as though there's still this idea of, but I could probably do something from home.
But, well, take GP surgery is a perfect example. So we've had one particular Gen Z who, she was actually 19-year-old and came to work on the reception, was able to do the job, was capable. That's what she'd kind of obviously said during the course of the interview process. She then had some issues that needed to be addressed, which were from a neurodiversity point of view. And I think, and the only bit in all of this that I think the business didn't do was kind of recognise that at an earlier stage.
Okay.
They didn't look through the medical form that she'd completed to be able to recognise things. But within, 3-4 weeks, it was picked up very quickly, and then conversations started had with her to work with her about what reasonable adjustments needed to be.
Right.
So she'd taken the job as a receptionist, and one of her reasonable adjustments was that she didn't want to be on the reception. So that's quite difficult, isn't it? She didn't want to talk to other people.
Hold on, I can't believe this can't be real.
Yes. So, but if you then don't want it, so she then wanted to be, have the option of being in a room on her own.
But how can you be the receptionist? You can't fulfil the duties of the job.
So then, but the situation then continued to escalate. So she wanted to be on her own. Then when she was on her own, she would then complain that she was on her own. So we had that situation. So there was a whole host of reasonable adjustments that she wanted to put in place. We suggested and she accepted. But it's hard for an employee to think, is that the right reasonable adjustment?
Yeah.
Which another example I'll move on to. But, you know, is it the right reasonable adjustment? Because actually it's you personally that's asking for these things to happen. So surely you need to know what works for you and what's going to make your work life easier to be able to progress. But then what turned into being a real problem was the parental involvement that got in at that point. So
At 19?
At 19. So, and as I say, she did have, a mum did have financial advocacy on her, but that's a thing.
What does that mean?
So that means that she would, the mother would be able to take care of all of her financial issues and any concerns about her pay, kind of managing her money. So a bit like what Britney Spears did years ago.
A conservative.
So that's...
I can't say that word.
No, but there's that type of thing, so it's a legal thing to do. But they don't have any advocacy over the rest of their lives. It was just about the financial part, which again the business didn't know about at the time. But then she started getting involved. So every time the practice manager went to have a conversation with the employee, she would then report that to her mum, and her mum would then come back to the practice manager.
Hold on, is that allowed?
Well, it's about your boundaries, and you know. So initially, the practice were being very good, they were being very reasonable, having a conversation with the mum to try and make sure that the work environment was right for her to be able to do.
Yeah.
But then that got more and more and more. So whether it would be then a Teams chat to the practice manager, whether it would be an email, and some points we got to 8 emails a day. And these weren't particularly pleasant emails, because when we start getting involved, we start getting the emails from the mother. And actually, we know what we're doing. So actually, I'm resilient enough. But if you've got someone who's
really hard,
really trying to, I mean, these practice managers are amazing at what they do, because they're trying to do so many things.
Oh, I can't imagine.
They're not a master of any, but they're trying to do so many different things that actually that then makes an impact, to the point that the practice manager went then off sick because of the impact that the parent was making.
I'm not
surprised.
Even
an employee.
I can't. So as a parent, I mean, and you as a parent. Can you imagine doing that at that age?
Not at that age. I think there's an element, if you think you're capable, if the Gen Z, the child is capable of being able to go to work, I don't think there's an element that you can get involved.
No.
I do think there's a point where you can, you know, help your child out, to be able to give them some guidance.
Absolutely.
At home, to be able to
That's
make
your
suggestions
job.
about what would work, what wouldn't work.
Yeah.
But to actually physically get involved in the workplace. And I think we've got, again, some more stats there, which is over 50% of parents get involved in the workplace situations and are regularly contacting managers.
Over 50%?
Over 50%. So I think with the nature of that, and then with the nature of AI, you know, so parents potentially using AI to be able to generate the emails that are being exchanged.
Yeah.
Not in this particular situation, they were just very, very direct, but they were so intense that actually, and I would probably say in that situation, the daughter didn't know majority of the emails that were being sent.
Really?
Yeah.
But it just doesn't feel right, does it?
It doesn't. But then that business then received a grievance, which was then put in place, and then the grievance appeal came in. I mean, the grievance appeal was over 27 pages long. So as a small practice employer, they then need to work out how to deal with that situation, which is, it's hard to raise your head on. So if you're thinking that, you know, you've got, you know, partners, you've got practice manager, you've got other levels in there, and you've got people who kind of are the direct line manager, it made an impact upon everybody from a business point of view. And, you know, it is real a head in hands moment for an employer to kind of think, you know, we've gone above and beyond, we've tried to do as much as what we can, and we can't do, we didn't think there was any more that we could do.
No.
But then you have to go through this whole legal situation around grievances and grievance appeals, and making sure you follow your process, because that falls, that falls at that hurdle, that's really bad. So when businesses are forced with this situation, they need to then get on and manage it, and it's really, really difficult.
Thank goodness you're there.
And that's part of it, isn't it? Because actually you've just become kind of the lifeline for them to be able to pick up, and sometimes just about giving them a little bit of counsel, a little bit of, you know, coaching on what to do next. And
so they don't feel so alone handling it.
Uh-huh.
So do you think this is where the fear comes from? Because obviously that's an extreme case. I mean, we say this, though, actually, you've just said there that over 50% have parental involvement. And if you've got parents who are sat at home, I mean, and don't get me wrong, you know, I contacted my eldest daughter's school recently about a health issue. I did use AI to help me draft the email to make sure that I'd covered all of the relevant points. You know, and that email that I sent was definitely a bit tougher than what I would normally send, but I knew that it needed a difference, and it was school. But in the workplace, there've been situations where I've gone, well, that's wrong. Well, that's terrible. Well, you shouldn't be treated like that. But my advice to her is always, you know what these conditions are. It's up to you whether or not you accept them.
Yeah.
It's okay to not accept them and walk away and go work somewhere else. You don't have to work there. But, these are your choices ultimately because you're old enough to be going to work. So you've got to make those choices. And I feel like as a parent, that's my job. I wouldn't get involved. Never. I would help from behind.
Yeah, from behind the scenes. And obviously, both my boys work in a restaurant as well. And
intense.
They don't tell me.
I'm not surprised.
And it's not because I would get involved.
I'm not telling me, Mum.
I'm not telling me, Mum, that's happened. And not because I would get involved, but it's because I would pass an opinion. Yeah. And I think they want to be able to handle it on their own. Yeah. Which is all credit to them.
It's part of learning, isn't it?
Yeah. And I think it's a kind of like, well, it should be done this way. And they're like, well, we'll just handle it our own way. And I think that it is part of learning. It's a credit to them that they wanted to. It is. But obviously, I think they've also got that mindset of, what is right and what's wrong from that workplace point of view, because they've heard me talking about it for the last, all their lives, really, of kind of the right and wrong and the expectations around it as well.
But also, they've grown up in a world now as well where they consume so much more content and actually they understand a lot more about what's right and wrong. Back in the day, I remember working in a recruitment agency. You were in the office 8 till 6. If you weren't on that phone all the time, there was actually a manager who would come round, pick up a phone and hit you around the head with it. That makes me sound really, really old. It wasn't even that long ago, but that was the culture and it was completely acceptable. Yeah. And even though everyone knew that it was unkind, it was just what it was. And you sucked it up. Whereas these days, I feel like they know that that's not acceptable and they wouldn't stand for it. I mean, in fact, what they probably do is film it and put it on TikTok. So you get cancelled anyway. But I think one of the really interesting things that came out with the conversations with the university students that you had on the podcast, we asked that question around, well, you asked that question. I feel like I did. I'm always in the background.
You're in.
You asked the question about, this idea of Gen Z being entitled. Yeah. What do you think? Do you agree with it? And it was Lauren who replied. She went, well, why shouldn't we be entitled? Yeah. And it's really stuck with me because when she said it, I thought, oh my God, yeah, why shouldn't you be? She said, why shouldn't we be entitled to a work-life balance, to work in an organisation where we agree with the values and it's got a good culture that's going to pay us fairly and that allows us to be able to have other things in our lives. And she was convincing me.
Yeah, that actually, why should they not be?
Should we all not be entitled?
Well, and I think they are starting out by setting the stall out. Yeah. I think and I think the research that we've done and speaking to the two students as well, but it highlights the fact that people are doing more to get the jobs than what they would have done previously as well. And again, something else that would like your niece had been involved in, wasn't it? Yeah. Working with the Times, wasn't it?
Yeah. So she did a piece for the Times. Actually, it was just posted this week, and it's about Manchester University now bringing in a rule that students have to do work placements. It's mandatory as part of their undergraduate degrees. And the reason for that is because it's so competitive now for grads to get a role that without some form of work experience, they just don't stand a chance at all. And I think, for a lot of these students, they haven't got the work experience, so the university is saying you're going to have to. I mean, obviously for the university, they're measured on their outcomes, aren't they? Yeah, definitely. They need these graduates to be recruited, but I think that really, really highlights exactly what Hope and Lauren said to us, that it's really difficult. Yeah. For young people, whether it's graduates, whether they're looking for apprenticeships, it's so competitive.
It's such a competitive marketplace. Yeah. And I think, as you say, talking to the two students, I think it wasn't just about work experience, was it? It was about volunteering, it was about everything. It was so many different aspects of their lives. Yeah. And I know the piece that had been done for the Times there, she'd said that she'd done 4 different placements to be able to get the opportunity to be a journalist with the Times. Yeah. So, and actually
she wouldn't have got it without the experience.
So, but that's quite interesting. Again, back to us leaving uni. Obviously, I'd always had a part-time job or 2 or 3. But you were able to select what you wanted to go and do.
You just knew you were going to get a job. Yeah. You didn't worry. I stayed in the same job that I was in while I was at uni. I just stayed for a bit longer.
Yeah. And so it's different. And then one of the other things I just read, and I think it was about the American Gen Zs, was there was 57% all have side hustles going on.
57%
all have
do you know
side
what? I
hustle.
love that. Obviously, as a side hustle girl.
Yes, But if you think so, and the the information I was reading around that was people go into jobs, say we go into jobs, and then people get stuck in jobs. They've seen their parents, they've seen their families, they're stuck in a job, and there's no flexibility around it because that's what you've trained to be.
Yeah.
But actually, to then open it up, and to be able to do something else and earn extra money, that means you're not stuck and tied in, because people don't go into employment now and think I'll be here for the next 35 years.
Oh no.
I
mean, to be fair, that sounds like my worst nightmare.
Yeah, mine too, as always as it comes along. But that's not the mindset anymore, is it?
No.
And also there's not the longevity in companies. But people want to challenge, they want to push. And I think one of the things that we've also seen, I think someone said to me recently that someone had gone in on kind of a 25, 30 grand a year job, then there was an 80 grand a year job advertised, and it was like, oh, well, I want to do that job. Well, you need a little bit of experience, more experience.
It's funny that, isn't it?
And it's that mindset of, well, I'm capable of being able to do it, so I want to be able to do it. Well, there's some steps in between. And it's not about holding people back, it's about making sure, back to the communication point, that there's some clear steps of pathways.
Realistic, isn't it?
To be able to do it.
Do you think that is because, and I know as a parent to Gen Z, I am very much you can achieve anything you want to achieve. I'm always pushing them. I'm their biggest cheerleader. I'll be really honest as well, but I am I'm a proper hype girl with the kids. Whereas I feel as though when I was younger, that nobody was really setting those kind of higher expectations. Nobody was saying, you could go and do this, you could go do that, do whatever it is that you want to do. It was very much get a degree that's going to get you a job. You need to meet a man, get married, settle down, all of these things. And I feel like I've gone completely the other way, which means that then are we setting expectations for the younger generation that actually maybe aren't quite so realistic? I get torn by it, because I want them to believe they can achieve anything, but at the same time, when they're looking at the £80,000 job when they've got a year's work experience,
then it's not reality. So that's where you have to be that tough love part of it that goes in with that as well. But I think if the reality that you have between a parent and child relationship, then that's part of it, isn't it?
Yeah.
I think, and I remember being at school, and it was only ever, being at the school was only about, being a school teacher, being weren't the fire brigade, weren't the police. It was all very traditional.
What was your careers advisor? What did they tell you that you needed to be?
A school teacher.
Yeah.
Well, because there was only like a handful of jobs that people were going to go and do, wasn't it? Yeah. And then, as I've mentioned on other podcasts, the idea of the amount of other roles that are available. Yeah. I think even when we've done the esports interview with Stephen.
Amazing.
Unbelievable. And I think I remember going into the school and them saying, when my sons went in, there'll be 10, like the jobs that come about in 5 years' time when they leave school aren't jobs that we even know what they are now. And that is very much come to fruition on it. There's jobs that, like when we talked to Stephen from esports, I mean, the amount of jobs that were there.
Absolutely.
Were unbelievable. And actually, as older people, I wouldn't necessarily know the soft skills or the questions to ask because I don't understand what the job titles are.
No.
So it's, as you're interviewing people, I think the employers have to be more open around what's coming and going. Yeah. With regard to the new jobs that are out there.
Definitely. I mean, my job didn't exist.
No.
It's surreal. And I think this...
How would you describe your job?
I've been really practicing my elevator pitch recently as well. I still can't nail it at all. But I think there's a lot in there in that, because of tech, and I hate when everyone bands around about AI, but because of AI, because of this, it does mean that actually those expectations, whilst we're sat here going, aren't realistic, they might be for some. Yeah. So, back in the day, it used to be that you either wanted to be a footballer or, for me, I really wanted to be an actor. That was my main thing. And people didn't think that was realistic. But now when kids are going, well, actually, I want to be a YouTuber or a content creator or whatever, these things are actually achievable.
Yeah. They can go off and do them, can't they?
And who was it? It was Eloise when she was on. And she'd gone from being an apprentice at Hayes Travel and decided that she really wanted to do content creation, and she just went and learned everything she could because there was so much information out there and she didn't have to have somebody else teach it to her. It was free, it was accessible, and that's the difference, isn't it? Yeah. And I think that we might be sat here going, oh, well, that's not realistic, but maybe to them maybe it is.
And it's why not, isn't it? Back to, the doors are open. Nobody ever said to me you could own a business, you could set up a business and own a business. I mean, it was just never a conversation to have.
No. Whereas now everyone's setting up businesses.
Yeah. Well, we're talking about the side hustles.
Yeah. Well, this is it.
But it's achievable, isn't it?
Yeah.
And I think those doors, you know, which is again part of the mindset shift, because these things are more achievable to it.
But so there's still, and I mean, gosh, you've touched on a couple of the challenges that you've heard already from some of the businesses that you've been working with. And I think a big thing for me is around, it was Steve and Parker right at the opening of the podcast was talking about attention span and trying to keep hold of when we are so consumed by short form content, it's the staying power. And we're not talking about jobs for life anymore. People don't really want jobs for life, but how do young people get interested in something that they're going to be interested enough to be able to kind of stick around with it? I know that my 18-year-old, for her, she really struggles. She can't watch a movie. She loses interest really easily with lots of things. She struggled with her A-levels as a result of that. I worry that for her, is she going to find something that she enjoys enough? That is going to make her go, do you know what, actually, I really want to give everything to this job, to this career, to learn.
But you don't think that's where it comes as being they need to try different things first? You know, it's not necessarily choosing a career at this point, is it? It's about being able to keep your options open, having the side hustle, realise that actually you can earn money and doing different things. It doesn't have to be a 9-to-5 job. It doesn't have, you know, like there's different variations of it as well, isn't there? That changes people's perception on things, and it's okay to try and think, I don't really fancy doing that anymore.
It is.
And I think, but again, as a parent, I think that's a change of mindset. Like I've got one son, he will be, you know, very much on track. He'll know what he wants to do. The other one, I think, will be a lot more free flowing. You know, and I think he'll just, you know, dabble in a few different things and trial and error, and actually it's just about being supportive in that, as opposed to giving the challenge too much on it. So I think, well, that's the shift of a different type of parent, isn't it? You know, it's not the one who's trying to control or push, really.
But what about for employers? Because that's difficult, isn't it? Because, I mean, the extreme example there about, you know, the member of staff who took a job as a receptionist and then decided that actually doesn't really want to be a receptionist. But you do see that a lot, where people will take on a job and then go, actually, I don't really like this part of the job. I'd rather do that over there. As a business, that's really, really difficult.
Well, especially if it's not a very big business as well. And I think one of the other things that's coming up very much is around, obviously we talked a little bit about neurodiversity with that position there, but there are other conditions that as an employer you don't necessarily know whether they are a true disability. So employment law, anything over 12 months, you know, an ongoing condition would be, so if someone had, say, cancer or something that, you know, went over a longer period of time, that would be straight away, would, you know, have disability rights, you know, that you would be protected. But things such as areas such as anxiety, which obviously comes under that mental health part of it, this is what employees are really scared of, you know. So if people start talking about anxiety, depression, that they're on medication, that they need time off for different areas around, about their mental health, I think a lot of employees are just going, and not really breathing out because they don't know how to take the next steps on it. And and I think another example to give would be somebody was employed, they've been employed for about 9-10 months, and they had occasional days of absence during that time. They'd had the probation period extended, had over 100 occasions of lates in that amount of time. 100 occasions. Conversation kept going back to feedback about it, you know, this is what it is, this is our expectation. You work in an environment that you needed to be there on time to be, you know, you're dealing with the public in this role, you need to be there on time. And she just never quite got that part of it. Anyway, they ended up getting to a point of dismissal at the end of the probation period, which had been extended. And that she then came back to make a claim because she was stating that anxiety and asthma were a disability. But and they are, however, it's difficult to define exactly what that looks like, because if you've got someone who's got anxiety and they maybe taken, you know, long periods of time off, or they're on really high medication, or they need to regularly go and visit the doctor. Well, in this situation, someone had a couple of different occasions, you know, putting it down to anxiety, but didn't take any medication, didn't need to go and visit a GP. So actually, is that a disability? Is it not?
It's really hard.
And it's really hard to define. And is asthma, if you don't take, you know, regular medication, is a disability, you know? And actually for an employer, that's really difficult to, you know, am I crossing a boundary? Am I not? Do I need to make sure that's given consideration? If someone's in a probation period and they've had 100 occasions of lateness.
I mean, crikey.
I mean, that to me is justifying enough.
Is that not almost every day?
Well, pretty much, yeah. But she was still she didn't accept that was what the situation was. So she started through a claim situation, through
and it is scary because
it is. But then the employer needs to, you know. Then obviously she appealed against a dismissal. So they've got that cost of being able to get that done. Then she put a grievance in, then she appealed against the grievance. So they've gone through this whole process. Then it's gone to ACAS. Then they've ended up settling at ACAS, and they've very much done that from a commercial viewpoint. So not that they're admitting any responsibility, and to be truthful, they didn't do anything wrong, in any of the steps that they took. But actually, there's the liability that's there that commercially to pay somebody, a low amount of money to get to remove the situation, because otherwise that, when we're talking about tribunal courts, really, things are being listed for 18 to 24 months in advance. I think there's one in London listed for 2029.
No.
So you're talking 3 years between someone raising that claim and actually getting in front of a judge to be able to make decisions. So, a business doesn't want that, but actually they need to make sure that the processes that they take on the steps to be able to ensure that if it does end up in a tribunal situation, that they've done everything that's right, that they've protected themselves, but it's what they feel is morally right as well.
Of course.
And it's, another example is, a business doing it wrong completely. So it was actually a friend of my son who was 20-year-old, worked there from being 16, and they just decided he'd been off on long-term sick for a knee operation, and they just decided to dismiss him. No process, nothing followed through, didn't treat him particularly
come on,
great.
it's just stupid.
Well, it is stupid, and I think they would have done that at any level, but actually there's that level of responsibility that the employer's got to be able to do it right.
Yeah.
So, I was helping, so we'll put a grievance in. A little bit of fun.
It's always right who you know.
But put a grievance in, and obviously did a grievance appeal, and actually just made things to be quite difficult for the employer. And they tried to re-employ him so they could dismiss him differently.
No.
Yeah, so that was it. But actually, him as a 20-year-old was really going through this whole thing of knowing it wasn't right, but didn't feel like he could speak back, that he didn't have that opportunity to be able to do it. And actually, for all I wasn't the parent, at that point. But I did help because I thought, do you know what?
Because it was wrong.
It was wrong, and I would hate to see that, I would hate to see that happening to my child.
Yeah.
But none of those things came from me. They came and I helped him formulate the letters.
He still handled it.
Them, but as being the forefront of that. But he just needed some help and guidance, because that's an employer really doing it wrong. And I'd probably guess that they thought they were doing it right. I think I think that some people just think
you can just
do what we want. We
Yeah.
get rid of like what we used to 10, 15, 20 years ago.
But that's the responsibility of a business owner to understand what you should and shouldn't do, what is right and wrong, and what the rules are.
And it's not always about the rules. It's about what's morally right.
Just being kind.
Yeah,
generally.
Doing it right.
But I do think that these situations are, I've employed a lot of people over the years, and I am definitely in a position now in one of my businesses where I'm at a pivotal moment where I am growing, and do I want to recruit?
Yeah.
And if I'm completely honest, my gut tells me just don't do it.
Yeah.
Because that's
because you've been hanging out with me for last
probably. I hear too many horror stories. But I think it's so scary, because I'm also somebody who wants to be fair, fair and kind, and actually generous.
Yeah.
I've always wanted to create a really, really nice working environment. Sometimes you get it right, sometimes you don't get it right. But I think it's so expensive to recruit people these days. It's expensive to employ, from your national insurance contributions, your obviously the pension contributions, everything that goes with it, holiday pay, sick pay, the lot. And to then have that fear as well that you're going to do something wrong, or you're going to do it all right, but somebody's still going to accuse you of doing something wrong.
And I think a lot of people don't realise that, when you add those extra benefits in, that's not the norm. Or they end up being there a couple of years, and then there's just an expectation that's there. When actually it's that give and take, isn't it? You give more, from an employer point of view, above kind of statutory requirements, but actually there's no coming back. And that could really go back to the point of, well, do they need to come back? You've put that there as an offer of their employment. Actually, as long as they turn up and do the work, is that not enough?
Yeah.
And it's a funny balance, isn't it, for an employer to make a decision on what is right and what's not.
And there's a big difference between small business and big business. And when you had Sam from Gen 2 on, obviously they're working really, really hard to create opportunities for the younger generation, but also to create a really good culture and environment with really clear expectations. And they have a lot of mentoring and buddying up systems. And that's all great. And it was amazing listening to what they're doing. But actually for a small business, a lot of that just isn't, it's just not possible.
Well, it's not feasible. It's not cost effective.
No.
It's, and it just becomes a bigger and bigger challenge.
Yeah.
I mean, graduate programs, I would imagine, a lot of small businesses would like to do that. But actually, all the, the concerns that come with that are difficult. Never mind the cost of it, but the challenges that come with it as well are difficult. And it's how you integrate. How would you integrate that into your normal day-to-day working environments as well?
No, it is. It's difficult
because that's not just impacting upon the employee, but also, it's also the manager. It's also the team.
Yeah,
it's kind of the way that one person behaves can have that full ripple effect upon
definitely
everybody else, doesn't it?
Well, actually, you've just made me think about as well another example from when you had Neil on the show, and we were talking about expectations around what you wear in the workplace, and this has changed a lot over the years. Back when I worked at Tesco, I had a uniform.
Yeah.
Iceland frozen food, my uniform was not sexy, I will tell you that. Then when I went into an office, the expectation was a suit. I wore a skirt suit and I wore heels. When I set up my own business, I didn't want it to be formal dress. I wanted it to be comfortable, but I did have a rule around no activewear.
Yeah.
And I felt as though at the time, so we're talking 2015, people weren't wearing activewear unless they were going to the gym.
Yeah.
And it just felt like a step too far for me in the workplace. And it was the one rule that I put in place. And I did have a member of the team who really hated the rule and would still wear activewear on the days that she knew that I wasn't going to be in. And I found that really difficult because I just thought I'm just putting one rule in place and it's what I don't want. And Neil mentioned about how they had a younger member of staff and he was wearing a cap.
Yeah.
To work.
Yeah, and the debate that we had about that was...
Yeah, and what it created.
Why is that not okay?
Yeah.
So actually, if you're wearing a cap for work, does it change their ability to be able to do the job? And actually, if they're maybe potentially not client-facing, or they're not dealing with customers or whatever it may be...
Does it matter?
And
Did it matter? Does activewear matter?
Does it matter? And actually... But there are still businesses that, I think... try not to put those rules in place, but then you turn it with someone with activewear and then you've got a client that comes in to see you and you're wearing a pair of leggings and some trainers and actually that's not acceptable.
But is it? Why?
But yeah.
Because this is the bit, and I think it's so great. But I think the big thing that came out of it was the setting the expectations.
Yeah.
So if you have a rule where if you don't think that wearing a cap in the office is acceptable, that needs to be clearly communicated. And for that member of staff, no one had ever said to him, just so that these are the expectations around what you wear to the office.
Yeah.
And because nobody had done that, it created a lot of animosity and whispering amongst team members going, I can't believe he's got a cap on.
Yeah.
Why isn't somebody, we wouldn't be allowed to wear a cap. And that could have all been avoided, couldn't it?
It could be. And I think what I always say about managers are that they need to take hold of situations if they're not happy about something or, something needs to be addressed. It's about doing it straight away because, as you've just explained, other people watch what a manager does.
Yeah.
So there's that whole gossip part of it and kind of, well, why is that not being addressed?
Yeah.
Then actually that manager really needs to take responsibility. If they want to make a difference, that needs to take responsibility for it.
Yeah.
We've had clients that'll get into, maybe it's turned up 2 weeks later and someone will say, such and such was using the mobile phone 2 weeks ago. Can you have a word with them about it? They shouldn't have been using it. And we're like, I think you've missed the moment on that.
Come on.
But actually some managers don't feel comfortable or confident enough because they're scared of the challenge back and they don't want any type of conflict on it.
Yeah.
But if they're not dealing with those small issues, then how do the bigger issues then get addressed on things?
I agree. And I think at the end of the day, we are all only human, and as managers, leaders, you do get some things wrong, and it's understanding that actually it's stupid, really, because it feels like a difficult conversation in the first instance to say, just so you know, this is what you can and can't wear at work. But actually, it's just about the boundaries.
Yeah, it is about setting boundaries.
Yeah.
We used to deal with a retail store, which was a jewellery store, and they were very clear on what needed to be worn. Your nails needed to be painted. You needed a certain amount you need a certain amount of makeup on. You need this. And so it was really restrictive. And I mean, we're probably talking like 12 years ago now. And at that point, I was like, oh, but actually, it was something that was put in place. Everybody that worked there who were that Gen Z generation, it was just obviously, 12 years ago, but it was the younger people at work. And then they all kind of, they all got on board with it.
Yeah.
They even used to bring people in from like your Debenhams counter, and learn people how to put makeup on.
Love that.
So it was all done. But I don't know whether you'd get away with that now.
I don't know. When I was cabin crew for Virgin, it was really, really strict as well around so your nails had to be red, your hair always had to be done, you had to have your lipstick on, that kind of thing. Whereas now they've completely relaxed it as well. You couldn't have tattoos on show, now you can. The women can wear trousers, you never used to be able to. So, but I think there must still be an element of, you must be able to say something, set some standards.
Yeah, and I think that's part of but what is a standard that really needs to be put in place? It's kind of...
In order to be able to do the job.
Yeah, to be able to do the job. Like as in, did those people who were selling jewellery need the nails painted, or did they need makeup on their face?
It's the makeup bit is really challenging, isn't it? Because actually, why should you have to put makeup on your face?
But actually, things like having your nails painted, which I always have done. But actually, if you're dealing with someone and you're touching and you're putting the rings on them and things like that, then actually it creates a good impression, doesn't it?
Doesn't it?
Yeah, it does. So it's interesting the balance of what's acceptable and what's not.
Totally.
And that's for an employer to think about.
Yeah.
Isn't it? It's about putting those things in place so everybody is quite clear on the communication, the feedback that's given.
And the communication bit as well, because we communicate differently to how we used to.
Yeah.
Because now, I mean, obviously emails is death by email. I hate emails anyway. I tend not to reply to emails.
Yeah.
Voice note is where it's at. We love a voice note, don't we? We love a voice note. But and this was something that Stephen talked about as well, that, you know, the way that Gen Z prefer to communicate.
Yeah.
They're not fluffy.
Yeah.
I think we're probably a little bit fluffier when we send an email, you know, this is the reason why. Hi, hey, how are you? Type thing. Whereas it's a bit more straight to the point. There's a lot more instant messaging as well. I know loads of big organisations use Slack. I think there's a real danger when it comes to this type of communication as well. And I did something really bad actually as a manager, and I still struggle with it now. And I was having a conversation in one Slack group which was with a senior management team, and basically I was really unhappy about something that another member of the wider team had done, and I expressed how unhappy I was in this one group, but accidentally sent it to the other group.
Yeah,
and that was my business. I was the owner of that business, and every single person saw it, and I instantly panicked. I deleted it. I was horrified that I did it, and had that type of technology not been available, I would never have done that.
Yeah.
It's not the sort of thing. It might have been a conversation that I might have had on a one-to-one with somebody, but I would never have put myself and that member of staff in that situation. And I did have a one-to-one conversation with the member of staff afterwards. I can't remember the advice that I got from the HR company at the time, but I had to play it. I apologised. Yeah. It was a terrible thing. And so I feel a bit torn by the type of communication, because I also hated being that type of person.
Yeah,
I fell into that trap of...
And that's because it's so easy to do, isn't it?
So easy. But what it created was it created a really bad environment as a result. And I caused that. Yeah. And it's something that I wouldn't do again. Yeah. And, I learned from it. And I am only human, and we do learn from these things. But I think there's a real danger, because the written word, the tone, the heat of the moment is very, very different. And because of remote working, there's a lot more of that, rather than these really honest conversations in an office.
Yeah, and I think that's where some of the difficulties come. I think one of the other businesses we helped out quite recently is they've had an apprentice being employed for about 12 months. The person that the apprentice was working alongside, they would kind of go out and do jobs together. That person was leaving, so therefore there was no role for the apprentice, because it was only a very, very small business. And they'd communicated that to him initially by text. But what it all then translates to, then obviously the mother gets involved, starts sending emails on behalf of the son. But then what all transpires is that the apprentice wouldn't actually communicate directly with the people that were the employer. So it was kind of a family-run business. There was a man and wife who run it, and he wouldn't actually, and so they would try and ring him, and he wouldn't pick up the phone. He would only respond to a text message.
Over a text.
And when they were trying to give him some direction, so when it came to the, saying, look, we haven't got a role for you anymore, then obviously they had to do that by email and construct it right. Yeah. But then obviously that's when, the mother gets involved, AI gets involved, and that was really down to a lack of communication from his point of view. He didn't want to communicate on a day-to-day basis, but actually, again, the role he was doing, you need to at least speak to your employer about what your job's going to be and how, what the expectations are around that. Yeah. And he wouldn't even have that conversation. So it really caused a massive problem for the employer. They were so upset, a lovely couple. Yeah. Who didn't want to have to, terminate somebody's employment in that way, but needed to. But then the pushback that was coming, and actually, it was again back to a lack of communication, and probably that time from the employee point of side. But they, as the employer, should have pushed a little bit more to be able to say, no, we need some clear communication. This is the way that we need to do it. So you probably fault on both sides, but ultimately, a message needed to be delivered, and it's the end result that comes in. But again, the challenges were real from the parent involvement, AI being involved in it, and the concept of, they went into panic mode as the employer.
Yeah. But it's interesting, isn't it? Because you were telling me a stat about how do Gen Z not preferred to be communicated to on a you know, a one-to-one,
yeah,
a face-to-face.
Yeah, so I think from stats that we looked at, was 72% prefer face-to-face.
It's interesting, isn't it?
Yeah.
Because actually they might prefer face-to-face, but the communication side of it, I mean, it's rare that somebody would pick up a phone these days. That shows my age.
Pick up the phone.
Not like this or like that. But yet they would rather have somebody sit in front of them and say, actually, we're going to terminate your employment, or actually this or that.
This is the feedback we need to give
so
you
it's
on that.
I almost find it a little bit confusing because they prefer it to be really direct and straightforward and not fluffy, but at the same time like to communicate. I suppose it is just very I don't know. I'm confused by what it is, the way the best way to do it, really.
And I think that's where it comes down to individuals, doesn't it? So I think it depends on the person that you're managing and understanding their circumstances, you know, understanding things. Everyone talked about neurodiversity, understanding what their needs are, and then how do you make sure that you do the communication. I think the days of kind of a blanket communication to all are gone. You know, I think it is, you know, depending upon what it is, needs to be tailored for individuals based upon what the circumstances are, which is but again, if you think about it from a manager's point of view, a manager really needs a good skill set to enable to be delivering on that. You know,
it's a harder job these days, isn't it?
It is, because actually, unless they're aware of their own, what we'll now class as emotional intelligence, unless they're aware of the impact of them saying something has on others, then the delivery of what's being said doesn't always come across right. You know, it's a simple thing. I was watching a programme last night, and he was making a comment of like, you know, well, I just say what needs to be said, and someone was trying to say, well, you just need to put some like softer edges around it. You just need to deliver it a little bit differently. And it was about talking to a kid as opposed to an adult, and there's like, just, you know, so it was interesting that, you know, it's interesting that people don't know enough about themselves to know what they deliver and the impact that it's going to have upon the individual.
Yeah.
And I always just think that people, you know, you say something and I might not think about it again ever, but actually I've said it to you, and 2 years later you're still thinking about those, you know, couple of sentences that have been done.
It's hard,
and that's
isn't
where
it?
we see grievances coming in place, and the negativity that comes in because people are then genuinely not happy, and it's that lack of communication. And I think that's where the 72% comes from, because I think Gen Zs are more inclined to challenge back, to be able to say, well, why did you think that? You know, actually, what about if we did something different, or actually what are the prospects for the future? I think that, you know, where an employee or a manager might shy away from it, I think that's where they want to be open, and I don't even think confrontation, but I think just open about what's next for them.
Yeah. And as well, one of the big things, I know obviously, you know, we've talked a bit around mental health, and it's amazing. People talk about it so much more these days. People are really open about it. There's loads of content on social around, you know, looking after your own mental health. There's a lot of talk around people going to therapy. Like, that's just become really commonplace, which I think is amazing. You know, I talk to my kids and I say, at some point in your life, you'll want to go and speak to somebody about some stuff, probably some stuff in your childhood as well. And they look at me blankly and I'm like, believe me, there'll be some things that you'll want to, there'll be some things that you want to talk about. I love that. But what it means is that actually they have a language. They have a vocabulary around mental health, and they're able to identify attachment styles. They're able to identify, well, actually, I was triggered by this because of this. Whereas we weren't taught anything like that, and I think that there's still, you know, so many people that still haven't done any of that work and still don't understand any of it. And for me, that's where there feels like there is a really big gap, because you might have a young person who's in their 20s who's able to look at somebody in their 50s and go, yep, I know exactly the type of person you are. I can understand exactly where that came from. When you say that, I know that you really mean this. Like, they're really quite well educated around it, and not formal education. They're educated from what they're consuming online.
And that's because of the speed of everything that's coming through all the time, isn't it? And I think they absorb information that they don't even realise that they're taking in.
It's phenomenal.
I think it's just the speed of stuff that's going through.
Yeah, but that's hard, isn't it? And I think especially you talk a lot about accidental managers. Yeah. So when people end up being a manager because they were really good at their job, but not because they've got the skills to be a manager, what a hard place that is.
What a really hard place. And I think, you know, things, and I think, again, mentioned on the podcast there is, you know, we've done some work with kind of domestic abuse situations or people who are taking their own lives around suicide, and the amount of people that do that at certain ages, and men being kind of a high category of that. But actually, sometimes that role that manager plays could be, you know, either of those categories coming and having a conversation, you know, the individuals, the employees coming and having a conversation and say, actually, this is what's going on at home and this is where I feel like I'm at. Yeah. And if that manager doesn't do the right thing, then actually it could go disastrously
detrimental,
wrong,
isn't it?
you know. But actually, on the positive side, if they do know how to deal with it, or certainly know how to refer, or know what the right next steps would be, then they could really make a difference to somebody's life.
Yeah.
You know, so I think it's how does an employer of any size make sure that people are empowered enough as managers to be able to deal with difficult situations, those difficult conversations to take place.
Definitely.
Yeah.
So it feels like we've still got loads to learn.
Absolutely.
As a for me as a business owner, what do I need to do?
I think you need to think about from you've got the older generation, you've got a younger generation. I think it's about how you bring those two gaps together. You know, start to think about actually you've got such expertise and knowledge over here, and then you've got a new way of working, and that's quite acceptance of like being diverse, looking at different communications. They've got different tools, they've got knowledge such as AI. You know, how do you bring those things together as an employer to make sure that actually that you move forward with a strong workforce, with a good culture, but actually that you're integrating people in, that you're having the right conversations with people. So I think there's a whole scope of what employers need to do, and I think it's what are the next steps for them. You know, what are they going to put in place, or what's in place already that really works and is being very efficient and effective within the workplace, and actually people are buying into. And what I wouldn't like to think is that people think we need to change everything, and we need to, we need to really, to make the future-proofing of the business, we need to change everything that we've got. That's not what it's about. I think it's slow tweaks and changes, because I don't think employees need to change 100% because you've got a Gen Z coming in. I think there's an element of Gen Z need to fit into what the business is as well. Yeah. And there needs to be kind of a middle ground. It's kind of moving them together, really, isn't it? Yeah. It's that middle ground to be able to rub next to each other to actually make it all succinct and work really clearly together.
I think it's a business feeling confident enough to be able to say it is still okay for us to run our business the way that we run it. Yeah. Yes, we need to think about how we communicate, about what our expectations are. Yeah. Are there some ways that we could do things better? But it's still okay to say, you're coming into our company, so you need to do it the way that we would do it.
Yeah, and also at the end of the day, people are there to be able to make money in businesses and make a difference, aren't they? You know, so whichever it is, they need to be, whether it's about, making money, whether it's about delivering a service, whether it's about doing something around charity work, there's a purpose of the business that's there that actually they need to be aware of and come into. But again, at that very beginning part, we often talk about kind of, making sure that you do your right recruitment pack, and then when you're coming on board, have a culture book instead of a handbook. So actually people are know enough about the culture, that they're doing the employer brand and stuff, that it's out there on whether it be TikTok or Instagram or kind of any other social platform, and your website is all representative, that actually when somebody then comes into the business, it's a smooth transition because
they know what they're getting.
Integrate in, expectations are very much highlighted, and those conversations at interview stage are really worthwhile, because actually, as we said about the lady from Bulgaria, her expectation was that she was going to continue to work there.
I know.
But for your expectation, that had just never been considered. So actually, to have those open conversations, from an employee to say, expectation is 2 days a week on the office, or you'll be out on client sites, and flexibility, whatever it might look like.
Yeah. Do you know what? One of the things that I really love where you talked there about we've got to bring the generations together is there's a trend that goes around on TikTok, which is me spending 8 hours a day with somebody's mum or somebody's dad. Yeah. And I love it. And you'll just see this young person dancing in front of this older person in the background. And it's funny because we always did that. You were all. I remember being the kid in a workplace, working with 50-year-old people. But I think that you didn't build the relationships in the way that actually the relationships are being built in the workplace these days. And I love to see it.
And it's quite difficult, isn't it? Because actually, people who are in the 40s and 50s have got different dynamics, haven't they? They've potentially got kids at home, they've got dependent responsibilities, whether that's parents, whether it's kids or partners or whoever it might be. So sometimes the responsibility is different, and I think sometimes building those relationships are therefore different in there as well. So I think you're trying to bring across the younger generation and the older, and kind of really try to get how they work well together. Yeah. But again, that it comes back to your culture. Yeah. And I think the most important thing out of all of this is that there will be challenges that employers need to come across, and they need to think that they're not isolated. They're not on their own, because actually we're dealing with these things on a day-to-day basis. Yeah. Every week we've got a new example of a difficult Gen Z situation, and we're then just helping them deal with it. So it's don't feel like you're the only one who's dealing with it. There are others. Yeah. And actually it's about kind of taking a step back and starting from the beginning and thinking about how you can take the right steps forward to be able to manage it, because the most important bit is managing it effectively for the employer, but also the employee and for the other people that are watching.
Yeah. And sometimes it makes me feel a little bit icky when we talk about Gen Z in that way, because it makes it feel like we're speaking about that generation in a negative light.
Yeah.
And it isn't that. It's about, we understand that it's different.
Yeah.
The world's different. The expectations are different. We're trying to figure out what we need to do to adjust to that, to make it all work together, but at the same time whilst continuing to run successful businesses.
Yeah.
Because ultimately we're here to generate revenue. And I think one of the biggest things is I was always really transparent with how much money the business made, so that anybody who I employed could see how, just where it all went. So how much we made, but then also what the expenses were. And I think a big thing for the younger generation is them being able to see that and to truly understand that, yes, you want this and you want that, but actually the business has to earn this much money over here in order for you to be able to have that. And I think sometimes businesses can be really cloak and dagger around money.
Yeah, but I think one of the difficulties that comes, and I think this is all generations, I don't think it's especially Gen Z, is people need to understand that they come to work to be able to do their part in a business. You know, as in there's not always just, you know, an abundance of money that's there.
No.
That actually they need to come in, they need to do their bit so that it earns the money to be able to bring it in to actually for the next part of it to happen. And it's that, I suppose in essence, like that supply chain through the business, whether you're working in accounts or HR, or whether you know, I don't know, a truck driver delivering things, or, you know, whatever it might be, you have an important part to play. And I think it's about people understanding what that role is to play within a business. And I think that's all generations that need to understand that a little bit more.
It is.
And just understand the concept of there's not always money at the end of the day. You know, a successful business can be successful. However, sometimes there's business challenges that means there's not always as much money available.
No. So we probably need to start wrapping this up now, because otherwise me and you will just sit here all day.
And chat all day.
We will probably continue the chat beyond this as well. But so I'm going to ask you, I've got a couple of final questions to ask you. The first one is, with you having two boys who are I was going to say Generation Z, but I would never normally say generation, but Gen Z.
Gen Z, yeah.
What is your advice to them?
I think I'm trying to be. I'm trying to let them kind of forge their own pathway, really. And I think, I'll relay a story of not my finest parenting moment. My oldest son getting his A-level results. He was expected to get a certain level. He got like significantly lower grades than what it was. Me kind of losing it during that day because he just didn't do anything to get to that point, you know, and it doesn't matter how many times. So there was, you know, a bit like the lazy boy syndrome that goes in. So I'd kind of, I knew that I'd got very involved, and we had a bit of a thing, and he's 21 now, we had a bit of a thing even earlier this year where I then realised that I need to back off, because it's about taking that step back, you know, and actually they now need to take their lives. Nobody was trying to control me when I was that age, you know, so actually it's about letting them grow and develop, and the youngest one's just finishing his A-levels now, and again it's about letting him flourish a little bit. I mean, at the moment all I would like is that people come in before 4:00 in the morning. I mean, that's where I'm living my life at the moment, worrying about what time people are coming in. So
how life changes.
People having babies, I mean, this is a different extreme when they're out driving the cars and drinking. But actually for me it is about, you know, trying to let them grow and let them do it themselves. And what I've said to both of them is really, I'm here to provide some advice and pick you up when you fall, but actually you need to be able to take that next step.
That nearly made me cry. Oh, what a lovely mummy.
But it is a next step, isn't it? And I've tried to do different variations of that, and I think now I'm at a point whereby that's the right way to let them go, isn't it?
Sounds good. And my final question to you that you ask everybody else, what does success look like to you?
I think I'm like still quite traditional, because actually it is about my personal growth. It's about how I see myself and how I can reflect upon myself. But it also is about one of the terms I use is kind of money provides you options and choices. Yeah. And actually, so for me, it is about, there is finances. That's part of as a success for me. And that's not so there's so much cash in the bank. It's more about, as we all know, I love to go on holiday, so it's about no. So it's about being able to have those experiences and go off and enjoy life, and that is my variation of success, because actually, you know, I know that I can grow and I can do my thing, and that my husband's 100% supportive over what I want to be able to do, and kind of quite happy to let me go off and do, you know, whatever that looks like from a business perspective. But actually, as long as I can then take that time out and go away on holiday, and the team can run, having a team that can, I suppose, is the other version of it.
Amazing.
Having the team that can actually just pick up and run while I'm not there, is part of the success out of it.
Yeah. Definitely.
And what's your version of success?
Oh, I didn't think you were going to flip it back on me. Very similar. I do believe that money gives you choices.
Yeah.
I have always been quite motivated by that, and I think that's from a childhood perspective, that I always knew that I wanted to live a life where I didn't feel like I was struggling.
Yeah.
But a big success for me is having fun. And it sounds really cheesy, but I love to laugh.
Yeah.
I've got loads of energy. So being able to spend time with the people that I love, burning off lots of energy and having enough money to be able to make choices, to be able to then do those fun things. It's probably very, very similar. And being the parent to my children that I think I always needed. Yeah. That is a massive
part of it as well.
Yes, definitely.
Well, thank you very much, Laura. Obviously, we've
thank
just
you.
had a great chat. We'll keep on chatting. But I do really appreciate the fact that we're able to have that, because it is a bit more, I think we've certainly covered off some more difficult conversations that and I certainly don't blame the people that we've had on the podcast show, because they are difficult conversations and about the right next steps. But I think it's been nice to be able to just share some examples to hopefully give people a little bit of confidence that the employees aren't standalone in those situations.
Yeah.
So thank you very much. Really
Thank you for having me on. Yay.
That is all for this episode of Mind the Generation Gap. I hope you found the conversation as valuable as I did, and it's clear when we actually take the time to listen, the gap between us doesn't feel anywhere near as wide.